Sampling has been around since the mid-80s, but the technology has continued to evolve. These days you've got some really powerful samplers, even multi-samplers. There's always been the option of generating sounds through synthesis and different methods of synthesis. But when sampling came around, recordings of real acoustic instruments somewhat changed the landscape. I joke that today, almost every sound heard by mankind seems to be available for free on the internet and you can download it. It's like there's nothing left to sample. But what hasn't changed is how to use those raw samples to create something musical. The other change is that there are many vendors with sampled instruments. Now the instruments add a lot more features and capabilities than just raw samples. And the players in that space are names you know: Native Instruments, UJAM, Spitfire Audio, Museo, East West, to name just a few. And there are some smaller vendors there too. Now, I'm leaving Arturia off that list, even though Arturia does have some sampled instruments in their collection, because their strength is actually synthesizers, vintage synthesizers that generate sound. In this video, I'm going to discuss 3 techniques on where to get your samples, how to use them, and what the difference is between raw samples, sample packs and expansions, as well as sampled instruments. How do these 3 things differ, and when should you use which one? The first technique is using samples, let's say raw samples. You can download sample packs from most of the major vendors for free, and there are some excellent sources of raw samples out there that you can add to your own library. In my case, I've developed a pretty thorough sample library of more than 450 gigabytes. It's mostly drums, but there's everything in there from melodic loops and organic instruments to sound effects and unusual samples. I've downloaded many free sample packs, and you can see them organized here into a folder called Samples and Loops. So let's say Cymatics, which is one of the sources that delivers some free samples that you can download. I could go into that directory just in Finder on my Mac, and I could preview some samples. There's some melodies. When I find something I like, I could just drag it from Finder into my DAW. But that's kind of a primitive way to do it. I prefer to use ADSR Sample Manager, and the advantage of this, it's interpreted all the meta tags from the samples themselves. And you can see here on the left, I've organized all of my sources of samples into libraries or folders. So if I wanted to look at, say, the Cymatic stuff, I can just select this, and it limits my results over here, and then I can type in tags like, say, piano, and just here, piano loops. And I've got the choice of one-shots or loops. I can modify that loop in ADSR Sample Manager. I can shorten it. I've got things like a high pass filter and a low pass filter I can enable, and I can change the key. So where it might be in D minor right now, I can change it to a different key, and I can hear the results. And then if I like what I've modified, I've got the choice of either using the raw sample or the process sample that I've modified and pulling that into my DAW by just dragging it from this little drag icon over here. So I've got a whole video on how to use ADSR Sample Manager, and that's just a better environment for using raw samples that you're likely to modify both in tempo and in pitch or key. There's a full video that I've done on ADSR Sample Manager, which is linked up above and down below in the description. Now, another way I might use raw samples is from within your DAW. Within Logic, there is a media browser, and in that media browser, you've got a mix of loops, MIDI loops, pattern loops, and session players, and you can turn these off or on to limit your results. So if I just want to see audio loops, I just select audio loops. So I could further filter by instrument. So I could say I just want to see electric piano. When you play a loop in the media browser, you've got a choice of hearing it in its original key, which you can see here, play in original key, or in the project key. To hear this in the key of C, I have to turn on play in original key. if I change that to the key of the song, and the key of the song is A major, so if I drag that in to my DAW, it's going to be in the proper key. Now, can I modify it within my DAW? Yeah, it has modification tools. I can open up that sample, I can shorten it or lengthen it. I could use the flex time capability to change the key, or I could just do something really crude. If you press Option up and down, you'll see right now in the title of the region, it just has the infinity symbol, but if I press Option, it says +1. I'm transposing up a semitone for each one of those. If I lower it. So again, I'm using raw samples, but I'm modifying things in my DAW. Now, if I really want to get fancy, I could say, let's get a drum beat. I can drag that drum beat into Quick Sampler. And Quick Sampler by default slices up the individual transients and assigns them to keys on my MIDI keyboard. So you can see C1 is assigned down here. Every key has been assigned to a certain sound, and I can pick and choose how much of that slicing I'm doing. I can, limit my sample to just one little section, and I can make all of these minor adjustments to the pitch, filtering. I can apply an LFO, multiple LFOs, which would be good for a melodic sound. So this would be the stage of taking a raw sample and making it into something totally different, maybe for a hip-hop song or something like that, where I just want to exclude, say, the snare sound from a sample. Now, one last thing you can do with a one-shot sample is turn it into a sampled instrument with just one sample. So here I've got a sample. And it's a loop, and it's not a one-shot, but by editing it, I can make it into a one-shot. So I pull it into Quick Sampler, and I click on one-shot, and I'm going to limit the sample to just this little part of the sample. Here's what it sounds like. And by default, Auto Sampler assigns that to every key on my MIDI controller. And I can play chords. So it's taken that one sample and mapped it to all of the MIDI notes. And you can create very quickly a sampled instrument out of just one section of a sample or a one-shot. The second category are sample packs, or what some vendors call expansions. These are curated groups of samples that are designed to work together. So the drum kits work with the bass parts and the melodic parts fit in. In the group of raw samples, you're likely to modify the sample using tools that are in your DAW or some third-party tools. In those, you may change the tempo and the pitch. You may chop samples, you may resize them. There's all kinds of techniques that you may apply to take that raw sample and make it your own. With sample packs and expansions, some of that heavy lifting has been done for you, and it's organized into a consistent theme. Cymatics sends out an invite to download a free preview pack, and this is where you get these free packs. But you'll see what they're really advertising is this Generations 3 sample packs, and they've got a preview, of course. But as you scroll down and look at what they offer, you can preview the stems and MIDI that's included. So here's one with soul and jazz samples inspired by the 60s. Here's funk disco samples. And these are all curated sample packs where everything in the pack is going to be organized for the same genre and the same type of composition. And then in order to sweeten the deal, they'll include a lot of free things. I mean, it's pretty good value and it's pretty extensive in terms of what you can get for just a few dollars. Here's another one of the major players, which is Loop Masters. Same company that makes up Loop Cloud and Plugin Boutique. They're all owned by the same organization, and they've got quite an extensive library. Of course, they're advertising whatever their latest hot topic is. But if you click on any one of these sample packs, you can usually preview the sounds, of course, see the price, and here you'll see the contents: 1.67 gigabytes of samples, 68 female vocal loops, pads, basses, ARP, synth sounds, 78 MIDI files. So they're not just audio files. These are MIDI files that you could use with any synth sound. They pretty much lay it all out, and you can do a search, of course, through their extensive library of hundreds and hundreds of sample packs for the sample pack that meets your requirements at the point in time. Now, Native Instruments has a slightly different method of delivering that content that's equivalent to a sample pack. They call it an expansion, and they have more than 50 of them to choose from. If you select one based on its genre or sounds, you'll see what the contents are. So in this case, they outline the content that is specific to Native Instruments: 50 machine kits, 59 battery kits, that's their drum software, 49 one-shots, 466 loops, and much more. Of course, as you scroll down, you can get all of the details of what makes up that expansion pack. They often include synth presets just for their synths, of course, and then they have some exclusive things that work with their Maschine hardware and the Maschine 2 software. The Native Instruments Maschine 2 software can be run standalone or with their Maschine 2 hardware, which is like a groove box with pads on it. You can pick and choose the expansion that you want to use. So here I'll select, say, Velvet Bloom, and it comes with a number of projects as well as drum beats, drum kits. There are loops and effects, and this is the way you scroll through and select what you want to hear. And the nice thing about their projects is that if you open up one of the projects, it will pre-populate the Maschine 2 software, and you can get an idea of what's included based on what it sounds like. And then you can dive into the individual drum kits if you want. So if I'm to open up one of these kits, it not only populates the sounds for that kit, which you can have up to 16 sounds, but it also has a preview of some MIDI, so you get a sense of what that kit sounds like. So the Maschine 2 software is not necessary, but it is a good way to use and preview what comes in those expansions. The assets in the expansions can also just be used directly in your DAW. Here I am back in Logic, and if I go into the directory on my file system for NI content and scroll down to the bottom, I'll see all of the expansions listed. So let's say I take a look at that Velvet Bloom library. You'll see that I've got samples, and they're organized by the instrument, but also loops. So I can dive into these loops and say, okay, there's guitar. What do these things sound like? They could be previewed this way directly from the file system, or you could preview them in ADSR Sample Manager. But finding the loops that you want, you drag them into your DAW, just like you would any other source of loops, and you can hear them there. I have a whole other video, there's a link up above and a link in the description, on how to take advantage of using Native Instruments expansions even without the Maschine 2 software or a Maschine device. One more example I want to demonstrate is how all of these pieces go together. This is Ampify Studio, which is a DAW-like Groovebox application that works with a Launchpad or any other pad device. And what they deliver is a sample pack, which you can see here, free packs, and open up a template. And what it will do is pre-populate all the cells on this grid, much like you might see in Ableton Live. And then once they're pre-populated, you can just click on what items you want to play, and they all kind of go together. So if I pick a drum part, I know that the bass parts will work with it. And the melodies are in the right key. And you could dive into what all the drum beats are, what all the vocal and melodic parts are, and of course, just open up another pack. One of the advantages of these curated packs all working together is that the melodic pieces can be changed. So right now it's in the key of A, but you can change it to a different key, and this will affect all of the samples that you hear. Press play. And And similarly, if I change the tempo, it changes everything in here. Because everything's been designed to work together. Now, to get the samples and the content from Ampify Studio into your DAW, there is a direct link to Ableton, and you can export all of these samples to Ableton. In fact, once they're exported, you could pull them into other DAWs like Logic. What you're buying there is not just the collection, but the artist's interpretation of what things go together. Some vendors, like Native Instruments, release expansions on a regular basis. It's a source of ongoing revenue for them, but it's also new sounds that can inspire you as a songwriter or a beatmaker. The third category are sampled instruments. Now, these instruments play samples very similar to category 1 and 2, but they've wrapped it in an instrument that has an arpeggiator, it has patterns, it has effects, all kinds of things that you can use in a very simple way to alter and change those samples for your musical composition. They're more expensive than category 1 and 2, but they offer more capabilities. If you dive into Complete 14, what you find is that it includes 36 sampled instruments. Here's kind of a look at them. They are pianos, they are guitars, they are basses. There's some horns, strings, percussion, quite an assortment of different instruments, largely acoustic instruments. And then there's some hybrid instruments that take advantage of things like voice, like Glaze is a voice-based thing. But that's a lot of instruments that play samples. Keep in mind, none of these are generating sound. These are all playing back recorded sounds in a creative way. Similarly, if you dive into UJAM, almost all of their instruments are sampled instruments. Everything from virtual guitarists and drummers, bassists, piano, beat making. But they're making the point that they sound realistic, that they are the best sounding instruments. And you can buy these, as you can see, in different ways. They do offer something called a full bundle. And all of their instruments tend to look like this example, which is Silk, one of their guitars. So a similar look and feel to all of their sampled instruments. And we'll describe how these work in just a second. Let's walk through an example. This is the Amber 2 acoustic guitar from UJAM. Now keep in mind that these sounds are all sampled. Nothing here is synthesized. So you've got recorded acoustic guitar being played back in different ways. So in this area of the instrument are the notes that will dictate what chords are played. And there's all kinds of parameters on how you manage the chords, whether they're open chords, certain types of chords. In the middle here are your style phrases, and at the bottom are the articulations that dictate how things are played. So if I choose a different style, hit a note, I get different patterns. And then on the left here, you've got sliding up and down. You can turn these articulations off or on, build up. So a combination of playing the keys on a MIDI controller with your left hand and your right hand dictate how this instrument will sound like guitar. It's a combination of patterns in the middle, articulations on the left, and the actual notes that dictate the chords on the right. Beyond that, you've got all kinds of controls to manage the sound, whether it's a soft sound or a hard sound, whether it's microphone or from the pickup of an electric guitar. And then you've got some effects. And here you can choose a variety of different effects, from delays and compressors to overdrive or tape. So those are the basic constructs of pretty much any sampled instrument. And now when you record a sampled instrument into your DAW, what you're recording is the actual key switches that have been pushed, not the actual notes. If you take a look at these notes, they are not MIDI notes that you would expect. They are just the key switches. Important concept is that those notes mean nothing unless you've got the sampled instrument available to play back what those key switches do. Another good example of a sampled instrument is Icon Bass from Native Instruments. Most of the session instruments from Native Instruments work the same way. You have different patterns that are triggered by these keys, C1, C#1. And if you click on the song browser, you've got complete songs, which are like presets. And you can filter what you see in the song by picking slap or fingered basses. So what you're doing is populating these key switches and what they'll do when you play. You've also got a long list here of sounds, whether it's a direct signal through a direct box, clean through an amp. You get to choose the particular sound. And as to what pattern's being played, there is a pattern browser. You can see they represent patterns by dots here, and you can search for patterns. There's hundreds of patterns in here. And the advantage of this pattern browser lets you look for different types of patterns: open, muted, plec, fingered, slap, and it's going to filter the results. So beyond picking the patterns and the key switch assignments, you've got a bunch of bass settings for the microphone or a DI box, and you can control the fret noise, the noise floor, and the tuning. Then there's different amp effects and foot switches that you can add in, and then there's some playback options. Sometimes sampled instruments take the form other than the acoustic instruments we're used to, like a guitar or a bass, strings, or something like that, and they seem very synth-like. In this case, I'm looking at one of the latest Play series instruments called Bouquet. It focuses on R&B sounds. With the Play series, you've typically got two sources: a sample on the left, you could have chosen from many, and a sample on the right, or the B part. And when you play them, there's a balance between the two. All of the encoders are mapped to do these things: cutoff, reso, plate, volume. And you have presets. And those presets, as you could see, were made up of many different potential samples. Quite a long list of samples would describe everything that's in Bouquet. Then, in addition to picking your samples, you have control over those sounds. Layer A, the transposition, the tuning, the pan, volume, all the same parameters for B. You've also got effects that you can apply, everything from EQ to delay, plate reverbs, tape, warble. Every Play instrument comes with a sequencer, so you've got some potential here. Turn the sequencer on. So what you can see here is we've taken the idea of raw samples, built them into an instrument, and added all of these parameters for controlling the modulation and the LFO, the envelopes, the layering, to come up with some really complex sounds. So this goes way beyond what we started with that group 1, but it still is sample based. The raw samples in category 1 that I'm focused on are usually free, but you could also subscribe to an online service like Splice or LoopCloud or others to get access to not just raw samples, but the sample packs and expansions that are grouped together and curated in category 2. The third category around sampled instruments is quite large. It's most cost effective to buy them in some kind of bundle. Some of the major vendors sell an all-inclusive bundle or a subscription. Every time they release new sampled instruments, you get a copy of it. The other thing to consider is that some vendors have a particular focus for a style of composition or a certain genre. For example, if you're a hip-hop, EDM type guy, you're going to find that there's some vendors that cater to that. If you do cinematic and orchestral sounds, which really take advantage of sampled instruments, you'll find certain vendors have a strength there. So it's good to know what you want before you go to the market and start spending money. One change to the sampling world from a technology point of view is the strides that are being made with physical modeling. You'll see a lot of videos about this on YouTube, and you'll even find information on my website about physical modeling synthesis and whether that overlaps a certain amount with sampling. If you found this video interesting and useful, click on the like button. Consider subscribing to the channel, that'll help me a lot. And if you have comments, I encourage that interaction. I love feedback, I love responding to comments. Thanks for watching.